Warning: this video might make you a better deer hunter. Whether it does or not depends on if you put the information to use. At the end of the day, that is my goal, to help you become a better deer hunter. Let's get into it. Hey guys, welcome back to Whitetail Affinity. In today's video, we're going to take a deep dive into one of the most important aspects when it comes to deer hunting, and that's shot placement. We're going to talk about not only shot placement, but the different angles associated with it, the different types of weapons being used. We're going to talk about deer anatomy as well.
Well, that's exactly what we want him to do.
I just blew that shot. So I've been wanting to make this video for a while now, and it really hit home the other day when I was at my daughter's softball practice. A fellow dad was talking about his season last year, and he said that he had shot 2 different bucks and lost both of them. And he was using a crossbow, and it just got me thinking that, I really think a lot of people need help with shot placement, especially new hunters and less experienced hunters. So that really drove it home for me to get this video made and out there for guys to learn. And so what I did, I've got my 3D target here, my archery target. I picked up some of these Ethikill anatomy targets, got them in Amazon. There was 5 of them in a pack for like 15 bucks. They're pretty cheap, but they're pretty cool. They're double-sided. They've got a deer body on the one side, and then on the other side is an anatomy target. And it's a pretty accurate depiction of the deer, of a deer's anatomy. So I picked these up to try to give a better visual to make this video. And what I did was cut the outside of it off for this target here. And I've got it toothpicked onto this target to try to keep it from blowing away. So what we're gonna do is go through different shot scenarios, different angles, whether you're on the ground, in a tree stand, using a bow or a gun. And when it comes to shot placement, none of these scenarios that I'm going to share with you today are conclusive. As with anything with deer hunting, there's always variables, there's exceptions to every rule. I always say never and never say always when it comes to deer hunting. But the way I'm going to go through all these shots is going to offer you the highest chance of a quick kill and a clean recovery of the animal. The best shot that you can take is the one that's the easiest to execute, offers the quickest, cleanest kill, and the highest rate of recovery. And so for these reasons, I'm also ordering these in order from the best shot scenario possible to the worst shot scenario possible. All right, guys, so the number 1 shot you should be striving to achieve is the broadside shot. Whether you're on the ground, in a tree stand, using a bow, gun, doesn't matter. It offers the largest area of vitals to aim at and hit. You've got roughly a 10 to 12 inch area here, depending on the size of the animal, that offers you lungs and heart, and which is going to kill the animal the quickest and most efficiently. You've got the largest margin for error here versus any other shot. In addition to having the most margin for error with this shot, you've got the least amount of meat being lost. You might lose some rib meat, but you're staying away from the major muscle groups of the rest of the animal. This shot also offers the quickest death, which is what we're, as hunters, trying to achieve. Probably the biggest benefit of a completely broadside shot, aside from the largest area of vitals to hit, is that it offers the best chance of a complete pass-through, which, especially for bow hunters, you definitely, that's what we want, is entry and exit holes, so the most blood loss, the best blood trails are achieved. So the broadside shot is the number 1 shot on this list, and this is ideally what we as hunters strive for in every situation when we take a shot on an animal. Okay guys, so the next best shot scenario is going to be a quartering away shot. If you find yourself in this situation, you're going to want to aim back from center of mass like you would on a broadside shot, because the angle of your arrow or your bullet, whatever you're using, is going to come in on an angle like this from behind. And you want to imagine the exit. If I lay this arrow like this, if I aim right for the heart, I'm going to be way too far forward. My arrow is going to be exiting up here behind the neck, up in the neck area. And so for that reason, you want to aim back farther. You want to actually hit towards the back of the rib cage, almost into the guts. And that's going to take out the liver and definitely one lung. Sometimes you hit the liver and clip both lungs, or even come down into the heart, depending on, if you're in a tree stand. Or sometimes you may hit the liver and both lungs, or come in, hit the liver, lungs, and the heart, depending on the situation, how hard it's quartered away from you. In this scenario, the most likely situation is that you're going to hit the liver and take out one or both lungs. And a lot of times that arrow, especially an arrow and sometimes even bullets, are not going to completely pass through the animal. It's going to lodge in that opposite shoulder depending on if you're, how far back or forward you are. But if you hit that deer perfectly on a quartering away shot, it's going to end up most likely on that opposite shoulder. That's why if you watch a lot of videos, a lot of times them deer on a quartering away shot that arrow will go in and it'll almost come back out, because when that animal starts to run, that shoulder pops that arrow back out. This isn't as ideal as a broadside shot, but I like quartering away shots. It does offer a large area to aim for. You from here back, somewhere in this area you want to aim for. But like I said, not too far forward. The chance of coming up in here and hitting the shoulder and leg bone is a lot more. And there's not very many arteries or anything on that opposite side. If you miss that heart to kill the animal, so you're the higher chance of wounding it. So what I like to do is aim, like I said, right to the back of the rib cage and try to quarter that arrow or that bullet all the way up through the vitals. So somewhere, if you can see that right here, something like that is what you want. Especially in a tree stand. I mean, if you're coming down, that arrow's also coming down, not just angled this way, but it's also coming down. So you want that arrow having its best chance of hitting the heart or clipping both lungs as well as the liver. This is the best way to aim on a quartering away shot. Now, as I said, with a bow, there's a lot less chance of that arrow passing through if you hit that opposite shoulder. With a gun, there's a lot more time for that bullet to have its energy dumped into the animal, especially if it hits that offside shoulder. So with a gun, it's a very effective shot. With a bow, it can be as well, as long as vital organs are hit. There's quick death time as long as the major organs are hit. The only other thing when you start getting into quartering shots that you have to watch out for is deflection. Now, especially with an expandable broadhead, there's a lot more chance of that arrow hitting a rib bone and deflecting because of that angle that you're introducing into the shot. And then it's even exaggerated more from a tree stand. You're coming down as well as on an angle. So deflection is something to keep in mind when you're taking these shots. Obviously, in all these shot scenarios, the best thing to do is to try to wait for a broadside shot, but we all know that that's not always possible in the moment of truth. So best thing to do is aim at the back of that rib cage, try to get that arrow or that bullet, aim at your exit, try to come out somewhere by that offside shoulder. The next shot scenario is the quartering two shot. And this shot is very risky. There's a lot of, all this shoulder area right here covers all the vitals from a quartering two shot, meaning that your arrow is going to come in on an angle like this from the front of the animal. So there's the window of shot placement is a lot smaller with this shot, because you have to avoid that whole shoulder, that big old scapula there and these leg bones. So the best thing to do is you want to tuck that arrow as close to that shoulder as possible. And this is why it's risky, because the margin for error is very small. So you want to aim right behind that shoulder and still imagine your exit, because you're going to want to try to take out at least one lung in the liver, or preferably heart, lung, part of the liver, or both lungs in the liver. You're going to want some variation of that, but you want to tuck that as close to that shoulder as possible, because if you go back and you aim for just the center of the mass of the deer and try to take out both lungs, you're going to get lungs, a single lung, the liver, and probably guts. There's a high likelihood of guts if you aim too far back with this shot. Depending on the severity of the angle, of course, the further you go forward, the less chance of hitting very many vitals are. You're going to hit maybe one lung, part of the liver, and then guts. If you come too far back, you might clip the liver and hit guts. In the worst case, you're going to hit just guts. So this shot's very risky. It's best to wait until that deer turns in some way, if you can, if you have time to let it turn so you can get a better shot, broadside or quartering away. With a quartering 2 shot, you have a much higher likelihood of deflection. So with a gun, it's not as much big of a deal. Even hitting that shoulder with a gun, with the right bullet, with the right caliber, right bullet, hitting that shoulder is not a deal breaker with a quartering 2 shot. But with the bow, there's a lot higher chance of deflection with the leg bones, the scapula, as well as the rib cage here. And it's just best to wait for a better shot with this, guys. It does offer a good recovery rate, a quick death if you hit major vital organs. But if you get too far back into the guts, liver, guts, you're going to be waiting 6 to 10 hours or more, depending on where you hit that animal. The chance of a pass through with this shot is a little better than quartering away because you don't have to deal with that offside shoulder. You're going to be hitting, hopefully, going through the rib cage, organs, and then out the backside, somewhere around the guts area, in front of the hindquarter. So it does offer a little higher chance of pass through with a bow, with an arrow, and it does offer more time for a bullet to expand, dump its energy inside the animal than a straight broadside shot. But again, best to try to wait for that broadside shot or some variation of it, or even a quartering away shot's better than a quartering 2 in my opinion. And one last thing about a quartering 2 shot is that if you miss this shoulder, you tuck it right behind it, your angle's not too severe to where you're coming into that hindquarter. This does not ruin a lot of meat. So if you stay away from the shoulder and your arrow or your bullet's not going to be lodged in that offside hindquarter, it doesn't ruin a lot of meat. So that is a 1+ of a quartering 2 shot. Still not worth the risk in my opinion. All right, guys, the next shot we're going to talk about is a gut shot or a paunch shot. This is when you hit the deer back here in the stomach or the intestines or both, behind the major vital organs. And originally I wasn't going to include this shot in the video because it's not a shot you should ever intentionally be taking. Like the ham shot coming up, I think if you are intentionally shooting a deer in the guts, that you shouldn't even be in the woods hunting. But with that being said, I do realize that things can happen. You might get too excited, pull the shot, end up hitting it in the guts. Your arrow might hit a branch and deflect into the guts. So realizing that stuff can happen, I thought that I should probably include this in the video just to be as informative and descriptive as possible when it comes to shot placement. The reason I'm putting this shot where I am in the video is because from a lethal standpoint, a gut shot deer will die 100% of the time. I would rather hit the deer in the guts than in the front shoulder any day, just because based on the fact that I know that deer will die. It's just going to take a lot longer for it to pass away. So although the deer will die 100% of the time, the downside is it's going to take a very long time for it to do so. When you hit a deer in the guts, you're waiting a minimum of 10 hours before you start tracking that animal. And the deer is going to die a very slow, painful death. It's most likely not going to die from blood loss or shock. It's most likely going to die from sepsis or blood poisoning from all the bacteria and everything after the shot getting into its system. The odds of a pass-through with this shot are higher because there's not a lot of bone structure there. There's not any muscles to go through. So a pass-through is more likely, but you're not going to have very good blood trail, if any at all. So you're going to be looking for green and brown matter on your arrow or on the ground. And like I said, it's best to wait at least 10 hours before tracking that deer. And a lot of times, because there's not a very good blood trail, you might end up having to call a dog in to find that animal. So guys, all in all, if you're only presented with a gut shot scenario, it's best to wait for a better shot, for a vital area hit, or to not take the shot at all. It's just not worth it. It's not worth the long track job, and it's not worth making that animal suffer for a very long time before it passes away. So the next shot that we're going to talk about is a shoulder shot. I do not recommend this shot at all with a bow. I don't care. Some guys there's a huge craze right now with the heavy arrows and the single bevel broadheads and all that, but for the majority of people that are hunting deer with store-bought arrows, off the shelf, broadheads, whatever, no fancy stuff, with a bow, stay right away from this. You do not want to mess with that. It's just not worth it. You have the highest chance of just wounding that animal and losing it when you hit that bone with an arrow. There's just not enough energy, not enough penetration with the majority of cases when it comes to a bow, even a crossbow. If you have a good solid one-piece broadhead, not a mechanical, that will punch through that with a high enough energy bow, or crossbow, it could be effective, but I still wouldn't recommend it, because if you can take this shot, why wouldn't you just aim here and take that shot? That's kind of my logic behind it. Now with a gun, it's a little different story. A gun will bust that shoulder most of the time with the right bullet. This is, like I said, there's a lot of factors and variables when it comes to this, but with a good bonded bullet, a high energy rifle, your 30-06s, 7 mags, big cartridges like that, will bust that shoulder and is effective. Do I recommend it still? Probably not. The other disadvantage with a shoulder shot, whether you're using a gun or a bow, you're gonna ruin a ton of meat right here. That whole front shoulder, you're gonna tear up a lot of meat. It's gonna be a lot of wasted meat for no reason, in my opinion. And the meat's one of the main reasons why we deer hunt, so I wouldn't want to ruin all that meat, and I don't think you should either. The other thing you're gonna hear a lot of when you talk with guys about shoulder shots is it's the quote unquote high lung. And it is an effective shot. I like it myself, and I've used it, but only with a gun. I would never try to high lung a deer with a gun. With a bow. And what they mean when they say high lung is, if you look here, the spine on a deer is actually below its back line. So you've got the spine comes through here and dips down behind the shoulder here, and then back up into the neck vertebrae. Well, what a guy means when he says high lung is that he's aiming high shoulder area. He might say high shoulder. A lot of guys just say high lung. So what they're talking about is aiming up here at the top of that shoulder, busting that shoulder, but they're hitting the spine. That's a lot of times what you see, that deer will just drop instantly when you hit them in the high shoulder area, because it's actually taking out the spine. It does take out the lungs as well when it gets in there, but the reason why that animal just drops, doesn't go anywhere, is because it hits that spine right behind that shoulder. And so it is effective with a gun. Like I said, with the right bullet, high enough energy, you wouldn't want to shoot that deer right there with a 223, or even, wouldn't even recommend 243, nothing like that. I mean, high long shots with the right bullet, the right caliber, are effective. With a bow, absolutely not. I would never recommend that. So all in all, try not to take shoulder shots. There's better shot opportunities, and like I said, if you can take this shot right here, aim back 2 inches and take out both lungs. Okay guys, the next shot we're going to talk about are frontal shots. These shots are very risky, and it seems like recently, in recent years, it's been more popular for guys to try to take these shots on deer. And I'm not sure why, if it's the higher energy equipment, better equipment, I don't know what the reasoning is, but honestly, I would not ever try to take one of these shots unless it was close enough and I had the right equipment and I trusted myself and my equipment enough to make that shot. So with that being said, if you do trust your stuff and you're confident in yourself and your abilities, you do what you want. For any inexperienced hunter that hasn't done a lot of shooting or taking of an animal, I would never recommend a frontal shot. So the reason why is because you have a very small window of lethality. There's not a lot of area here to be effective. A lot of the vitals are protected by these front shoulders, as well as the brisket. The brisket comes up into here, and so you have a very small window in the neck area just above that brisket to sneak an arrow or a bullet into. Now with a bow, like I said, the situation would have to be perfect for me to take this shot. And the reason why is because when you shoot into this deer with an arrow, the likelihood of hitting both lungs is probably not good. That deer is probably going to be quartered to you in some direction or manner, and probably not straight on perfect to where that broadhead can go in and clip both lungs, or come down in if you're in a tree stand and hit the heart or both lungs. So you're probably most likely going to be single lunging the deer, and not only that, but coming into the liver and guts possibly. The blood trail is not going to be very good at all. And unless you hit those two main arteries that run up the deer's neck, you're probably not going to have much of a blood trail. And with a gun, it's a little different story. With a gun, the energy is there. Arrows kill by hemorrhage, bullets kill by shock. So the reason that a gun would be better in this scenario than a bow is because once that bullet gets, if that bullet gets past the brisket and into the chest cavity of the deer, it has all kinds of time to dump all of its energy, and it has a ton of time to go all the way through that deer, dump all of its energy, do as much destruction as possible, and that deer probably will die very quickly with the right bullet, a large enough caliber, etc. You run the chance of risking losing quite a bit of meat if you're off just slightly and you hit the shoulder, or if the bullet or arrow goes all the way into the hindquarters, you run the risk of ruining some meat there. And so all in all, guys, I just do not recommend this shot. Like I said, unless you're an experienced hunter in the right scenario, and very likely that's not going to happen. So it's best just to try to wait for a better shot. All right, guys, so the next shot we're going to talk about here is a neck shot. And a neck shot is anything, I'd say, below the deer's head, below its ears, down to where its neck meets its shoulders. And this is a very low percentage marginal shot. There's not a lot of margin for error. There's a very small window of lethal anything running through this part of the deer. You've got the neck vertebrae, and there's the two main arteries that run up the deer's neck. So with a bow, I would not try to shoot a deer in the neck. There's just not enough there to make the shot worth it. You risk the chance of wounding the animal and probably never recovering it, because unless you hit those main arteries, there's not going to be a lot of blood, and that deer's going to probably die a slow, painful death. Now, with that being said, with a gun, it's a little bit different. I've shot, I don't even know how many, but I know I've shot well over a dozen deer in the neck. And with a gun, it's pretty awesome because it doesn't ruin a lot of meat. You lose a little bit of your neck roast, but the deer, I've never had a deer run or move more than 10 feet if I hit it in the neck with a gun. So with a gun, it's a great shot if it's the right shot. If the deer, if you have the right distance, if you're accurate with your rifle, you've practiced all those things, you've got a clear, good shot at the neck. It's a very good shot with a gun. The deer usually is dead before it hits the ground. And so with that being said, even still, especially for inexperienced hunters, it's best to wait for a better shot than a neck shot. What I always did was I aimed right for the white patch on the deer's throat if it was facing me or looking at me in some general manner. Otherwise, I'd put it, somewhere mid-neck and squeeze the trigger. Doesn't ruin a lot of meat, and it's very effective with a gun. But I would not recommend it with a bow, and I'd still say you should wait for a better shot. All right, guys, the next shot we're going to talk about is a ham shot. You're hitting the animal in the rear hindquarters, and this is just a terrible shot. If you intentionally take this shot, you shouldn't even be hunting. Yes, if you hit those main arteries back there, the deer will be dead very quickly, but there are much better shot opportunities. If you can take this shot, you should be able to shoot up in here. And if you can't do that, then you should not take this shot. There's only a couple arteries back there. If you don't hit those, the animal is going to live for quite a while and die a very slow, painful death. You're going to ruin a ton of meat, and so it's just best to avoid at any cost, guys. There's also very little likelihood or low percentage that an arrow, or even a bullet for that matter, is going to have a complete pass-through. So that's going to contribute even more to the bad shot by making the blood trail very sparse or non-existent. Next shot we're going to talk about is a rear shot, or the Texas heart shot, as a lot of guys like to call it. Basically, you're aiming for the rear end of the animal. You're trying to aim that bullet or that broadhead directly center of its rear end and up through into the vitals. And again, this is another shot where you should always try to wait for a better shot. In the scenarios where the guys have done that and it's worked, they've gotten, in my opinion, they've gotten very lucky. With a bow, I would absolutely never take that shot. And not only with a bow, but also with a gun. With a gun, it's a little more effective. You have a lot better chance of that bullet penetrating up through this dense hunk of meat back here and up into the vital organs. But with a bow, it's a no-go at all. And even with a gun, if you're off, if you're not dead center, if you're just angled slightly, I mean, you're gonna ruin a ton of meat first and foremost. So you're likely gonna hit these hindquarters, not get a lot of penetration. If you miss the arteries that are back here in these hindquarters and fail to hit anything up here, now that deer is gonna die a slow, painful death. And so unless you're perfectly dead center, and I would say probably on the ground, because if you are trying to shoot there in a tree stand, your arrow, or even your bullet is going to end up coming down through the guts and hit nothing vital. You're going to have a gut shot track job anyway. You're going to be waiting 10, 12 plus hours. And that's with it being perfectly center. But even with all that said, unless you're dead center, going right up its butt into the vitals, you're not going to have a very good recovery rate. I mean, you could get lucky, but like I said, you'd have to be within, I'd say within an inch of center by the time you factor in that angle of where it's going to end up exiting, or what organs it's going to pass through on its way up through. You know, dead center would be the best way, but I just wouldn't take this shot. I don't recommend it, and I think you should wait for a better shot or let that animal live to see another day and give you another chance to hunt it. Next shot we'll talk about, guys, are headshots. Obviously, very small window of opportunity there to sneak a bullet or an arrow into. It's very effective. If you hit anywhere, I'd say from the eyeball back, under the ear, in this area, that deer will drop instantly and be dead almost instantly. But either way, even with that and very little to probably no meat loss, I still do not recommend headshots. Are they effective? Absolutely, especially with a gun. With a bow, I would never shoot a deer in the head. But even with a gun, again, you have a better shot down here in the vitals. If you can hit here, you could probably hit somewhere else on the deer. I mean, let's be honest. So headshots, very effective, little to no meat loss, but do not recommend. Think you should wait for a better shot. Okay, guys, so now that we've gotten through most of the shot scenarios that you're going to find yourself in, and what to look for and aim for and all that, I want to talk a little bit about the organs being hit and the blood that's going to be left when those organs are hit, and as well as the recovery times of a lot of those different scenarios, whether you hit heart, lungs, liver, guts. The cool thing about these targets that I bought is it came with this little quick reference blood trail guide, and it's pretty accurate. It shows you here 30 minutes for a heart shot for a wait time, and shows you kind of the color of blood that you can expect. An hour for a lung shot, shows you pink frothy blood. 6 hours for a liver shot, dark red blood. And 10 hours for a gut shot, having green and brown on your arrow or on the ground. So it's a pretty handy little quick reference guide, and it's actually pretty accurate. It's basically, when I got it, I was, pretty much how I do my tracking and everything after the shot as well. So if you guys find yourself with a heart shot or double lung shot, that deer's probably going to be dead within 2 minutes or so. And you're probably going to have a nice blood trail if you had a complete pass through. And even if you didn't, it's probably going to be a good blood trail. So yeah, it's best to wait at least 30 minutes though to an hour. Even with that, even though the deer is probably dead within that time frame, you can expect it to be dead within a couple minutes or about 100 yards or less. It's still best to wait, and give yourself about an hour or so to calm down, gather your things and all that. So if you hit here or anything up in here, give it about an hour after your shot. You're going to look for bright red blood indicating a heart shot, or pink frothy blood indicating lung shot. You may have both if you hit both. When you get back into the liver, especially when you get into these quartering shots that we talked about, you're going to have possibly different variations of blood. But if you have a straight liver shot, you're going to have dark red blood. And It may not be sprays or, you know, big splashes of blood. It might just be drops here and there. It might not be a very well-defined blood trail, but looking at that dark blood, it's a good indicator of a liver shot. And this little chart here says 6 hours to give that deer to time to, you know, completely expire. And I agree with that. You know, I would say 4 to 6, you know, depending on if you can see the deer, if it bedded, if you can, depending on where it went. There's a lot of variables, just like all the rest of this stuff. But 4 to 6 hours is definitely a good window to wait on a liver shot deer. When you get into guts, you're 10 hours minimum. I mean, if you get your arrow and there's brown and or green matter on it, indicating that you hit something in the stomach area, went through food and whatnot, or intestines, you're gonna want to wait at least 10 hours for that deer. And honestly, I would probably wait even longer. Them deer can live a long time, especially if you hit just guts. If you clip a liver and get into the guts, it's gonna be a little less. Even if you get lungs, liver, guts on a quartering 2-shot or something like that, or even a quartering away, it's going to be a little less probably. But regardless, if you find that green and brown matter on your arrows, on your arrow or on the ground, it's best to give that deer 10 to 12 hours before you start tracking it. Now let's say you didn't hit any of these organs here. Let's say you got too far forward into that shoulder, or you were too far back. The front shoulder shot, you're gonna have to hit some of these main arteries and have a real good blood trail to have a good chance of success on finding that deer or having that deer expire within a reasonable amount of time. Shoulder shots are very condition and situation specific because there's a lot of factors, just like all the rest of this. If it, depending on the angle, depending on if you hit some other organ. But a straight-on shoulder shot, you're going to be in trouble unless you hit an organ. Let's just put it that way. You might have a good blood trail if you've got blood sprays because you hit that artery. Very good chance that deer may be dead. But there's also a good chance it may not be dead. There's a lot of deer that you hit in the shoulder, and honestly, you almost have to push that deer to weaken it to keep that blood loss coming in order to find it, in order to finish it off or find it dead. So shoulder shots are definitely, I have a dog tracker friend that, you know, he said that shoulder shots are their least favorite of all the shots and least chance of recovery. So it's best to stay away from that shoulder. There's just not a lot of vital organs behind it to hit, to kill it. And all this bone structure here will definitely deter it as well. Now with a ham shot, you've got a lot more meat, arteries. There's bigger arteries back there. If you hit those arteries, you're most likely going to have a very good blood trail. It's probably going to be bright red blood, like heart blood. It's best to give that deer, I'm going to say 6 to 8 hours minimum to expire. And that's with a good blood trail, you know, not just drops here and there. It's just not a very high percentage shot. And then if you don't hit those arteries, it's even less percentage. So if you have those kinds of shots, you're going to have to track carefully, give that deer enough time to expire, and honestly hope for the best. Now with the head and neck shots, every neck shot, I've never taken a head shot, but every neck shot that I've ever taken, that deer's dead within 10 feet. It might lunge real quick and fall. Most of the time they just drop like a sack of potatoes and they're dead before they hit the ground. So neck head shots, you're probably going to see the animal where it's expired. Not going to be a lot of track job with that, hopefully, for you guys. So, but again, best to just come back to this area. There's something that I want to touch on again. I touched on it earlier on one of the shot scenarios, but a lot of guys talk about the spine, and there's a concept out there of no man's land. And last year I found out firsthand all about no man's land. I took a shot on a pretty decent 8-point, hit him too high, and never found a speck of blood, never found my arrow, nothing. And I thought for sure when I took that shot, after I released, I knew it was too high, but I thought for sure that deer would have dropped in his tracks from hitting his spine. And after watching the video over, I realized I just hit him way too high. A lot of guys think the top of the back is where the spine is, and that's just incorrect. If you've ever processed a deer, took the back straps out of a deer, you've got these vertebrates here that stick up, and the back straps ride right along each side of that, along the spine, above the spine. And so the no man's land thing is, in my opinion, there is no man's land. I think that no man's land is you hit the deer above the spine and above all these vitals. So if it didn't drop in its tracks, you just hit backstrap. And a lot of guys will say that they hit, somewhere in here and the deer lived. Well, I guess there's anything's possible. Like I said, never say never, right? But the majority of times when guys say they hit no man's land, they're hitting above this spinal column where all those nerves are, that if you hit that, the deer's gonna drop. Almost always gonna drop in its tracks. Tommy actually shot a deer 2 years ago, and he hit that doe. She was probably 16 yards, 18 yards, something like that, but he hit her right here. And that deer dropped right in her tracks, moved around for probably 2 minutes, and then she died because that arrow went down and took out the top of this lung and took out the whole other lung on the offside. But he hit that spine right here, and that's why that deer dropped. So when you hear no man's land, kind of take it with a grain of salt, because above this is the spine. It dips down, like I said, behind that shoulder, and all above that is backstrap and neck meat once you get up in here. But if you hit that spine, that deer's probably going to drop. Or if you hit just below that spine, you've got a double lung or single lung, some variation of a lung shot. And so that I just wanted to touch on that again, because I think it causes a lot of confusion for guys. And try to keep down below that spine is, I guess, the best advice. I believe it was last year, or it might have been year before, 2022, a dog tracker came out with a map of recoveries and losses based on shot placement for his clients. And I want to show a picture of it here for you guys to look at. And I think it's a really good visual representation of how different shots yield different results as far as recovery of animal. That's the ultimate, obviously that's the end goal. So when we start talking about the dog tracking thing, I believe that comes into play. That should be your very last resort. When we're talking about tracking animals and shot placement and all that, I think that tracking deer, which is going to be the next video that I probably do, tracking deer is becoming a lost art, because everybody just wants to take a marginal shot and then, I'll just call it dog, and not worry about tracking the animal or having that skill that I think is still important. I think it's, it's like any other dying art or skill that's being lost to modernization and all that. Do I think it's a great tool? Yes, absolutely. I totally agree, and think that dog tracking is a wonderful thing to have, but I think it should be your last resort. So take a look at this picture, and as you can see, all the shots that are laid out there that were recoverable, are most of them are in that zone, where in that area of the vitals in some representation. And most of the ones that they didn't recover were outside of that, shoulder, hams. So something to think about, something to give you guys another visual representation of what to look for and think about before you take your next shot. But we're going to talk more about the dog tracking thing in the next video. You've heard it before probably, maybe not, but aim small, miss small. And what that means, if you haven't heard that before, if you're aiming at this circle, and then if that's the small, that's where you're aiming small, and if you miss that small circle, you're only going to miss it by a small amount. So when you look at a deer, don't just aim at the whole body. Don't just put your pin center mass. Make this mistake that I've made before in the past. Aim at a specific spot on that deer, whether it's a tuft of hair, whether it's a crease in its skin, or where its leg meets its chest. Aim at some sort of little, I don't care if it's a scar, if it's a bug that landed on it, it doesn't matter. If you aim small, you're gonna miss small, and that's what that means. So that's definitely something to remember. I want to touch on a few last thoughts here. The biggest one being that the difference between a bow and a gun. As I said before, bows and arrows and broadheads kill by hemorrhage, which is internal bleeding and damage to tissue. Bullets kill by shock. You can, if you've ever muzzleloader hunted and shot a deer broadside with a sabot, the bullet hole, or the hole from the slug, is very small, not a lot of blood trail, but the shock from that is what really does the damage to the animal. So I've seen a lot of scenarios, my grandfather being one of them, where when he started crossbow hunting, he got that crossbow in his hands and he thought it was a gun, and he would take frontal shots and shoulder shots. And I spent way more time than I care to admit tracking wounded deer through swamps, and all the hours that I had into that because of those marginal shots. And unfortunately, I didn't find all those deer. So there's a different, you have to factor these things in. Bows and guns are completely different, and as such, the shot placement should be considered more carefully with a bow. You can have more of a marginal shot with a gun and still have an effective, a lethal kill versus a bow. If that arrow had all that energy that that bullet has, it might be a different scenario, but since it doesn't, you've got to approach it differently and apply the things that you might learn here today to your next shot and the next shot placement. As far as bows goes, some differences are that a high poundage bow, a 90-pound bow, is going to penetrate more than a 40-pound bow, everything else being equal. Same thing with expandable broadheads versus fixed blades. It's a proven fact that fixed blades are going to penetrate better. They're going to, they break less, they deflect less. There's just a lot to it. So when you have them quartering shots, and or a more marginal shot with a mechanical broadhead, you have to consider those things to have the highest success. When it comes to a gun, a 223 is not as effective as far as energy and shock as a 300 Win Mag, and everything else being equal, the 300 Win Mag is going to kill the deer more effectively just based on that alone. Some differences with bullets come into play as well. You wouldn't want to use a 45 grain varmint bullet on deer. You'd want to get a good bonded bullet, an AccuBond, a Nosler partition, a Barnes TSX, something like that. If you've got a smaller caliber, that's going to penetrate and as well as open up and cause damage and inflict internal damage on the deer. So there's just a lot of things that you have to consider when it comes to shot placement, guys, and I really hope that I've covered a majority of things here. I learned all this through trial and error myself. This is all from my experience growing up and shooting deer and the heartache of not finding them and all that. Anyway, after that, guys, I just want you to remember too that this video there's a lot of variables. I've tried to cover as much as I can and be as helpful and informational as I can be, but every situation is different, and that's why watch videos, talk to friends, listen to experiences, learn from your mistakes and what you do when it comes to taking shots, and replay that in your mind of what went wrong and what you can be better at. Try to better yourself as best you can when it comes to shot placement, because it's a huge deal. With that, guys, I appreciate your time. I hope this video helped. If this video gave you any value in any way, smash that subscribe button, hit like, leave a comment below. Let me know what you guys think that I could have said different, said better, added. Let me know your thoughts. I appreciate each and every one of you for watching, and until next time, we'll see you guys all in the next video.